Isn't everyone around you repeating the same steps? But if one man could remember the dance, could know the time, then he could change things.
This dance is nearly over.
At this year's BAFTAs, franchise creative director Marc-Alexis Cortier delivered an extensive presentation detailing the challenges and changes that had faced Assassin's Creed in the past, remarking that the franchise had gone through two distinct phases. He stated that everything from the first game up until Syndicate was the first phase of the franchise, and that from Origins to Mirage was a phase 2, in which the games shifted from action-adventure to an RPG format. Now, personally, I feel like breaking up Assassin's Creed into only two phases is quite surface level. I could easily break it down further into 5 or 6 phases, if you ask me. But that could be its own video. With a third phase on the horizon starting with Assassin's Creed Shadows, it begs the question of when did Assassin's Creed make the conscious decision to change direction? And I think I have the answer. It's no coincidence that Assassin's Creed Syndicate marks the end of the first phase of Assassin's Creed, and that game was headed by Mark himself for the first time. Assassin's Creed is now known for being a story of two studios, Ubisoft Montreal and Ubisoft Quebec, each with their vision of what Assassin's Creed should be, and again, that started with Syndicate. Now, this is my opinion, but I think Syndicate is pretty lacklustre. It's not the grand finale of this phase of Assassin's Creed, and it's not bad enough to even warrant a change in direction. It's serviceable, there's passion and effort put into it, and from a technical standpoint, it was a big step up from its predecessor. Syndicate scaled back on the massive ambition of AC Unity and delivered a better polished product because of it. So, why did Assassin's Creed take a break after giving us Syndicate? Was the fallout of Unity too much to bear, shaking the team to the point of changing the franchise direction entirely? Or was the team feeling constricted after having to dial things back to meet the technical requirements at launch? Well, what if I told you that there is a scene in Assassin's Creed Syndicate that somewhat answers this question? It's one that you need to put your conspiracy hats on to entertain, but I think it says loud and clear the feelings the writers of Syndicate had towards the franchise. And yes, you've seen Evie in the thumbnail, and no, that's not clickbait. Although I've talked about this scene before in my Evie character study, the recent clarification we got at the BAFTAs on how Ubisoft views Assassin's Creed creatively, I think only reinforces the point that this scene in particular makes. This is a series that I've dubbed One Assassin in my Valhalla video, and I'm going to keep that pun going forward. Now let's get into our gowns and kick some balls, because we're breaking down the scene between Evie, Frye and Crawford Starrick at the end of Assassin's Creed Syndicate.
I never liked balls.
So, to provide some context on this scene, Jacob and Evie are looking to stop Crawford Starrick from reaching the vault near Buckingham Palace. Within that vault is a nice scarf that will grant Crawford Starrick immortality as long as he's wearing it, akin to the staff we see later in Odyssey. Whilst Jacob searches around the grounds for the location of the vault, Evie runs into Queen Victoria and then gets intercepted by Crawford Starrick at the ball.
Miss Frye, may I have this dance?
This is the first time that Crawford Starrick has interacted with any characters outside of his Templar enforcers. It's the first time we get anyone that challenges his ideology. Now, Crawford is a literal moustache-twirling villain, therefore he delivers a good old monologue while dancing with Evie. Of course, this is a deception so he can steal the key to the vault that Evie has on her necklace. Syndicate isn't a game where the writing goes past the mission you're in. It's a game where ideas are presented and never really followed up on. That speech that Crawford Starrick gives to Evie follows similarly. However, I think the motivation for Crawford is actually given a fair amount of justification. When Crawford grabs Evie's hand, she says to him that the game is over. Syndicate has a lot of lines throughout the game that border on parody.
Oh, what's this, Greenie? Assassin Christmas.
So I think this is an example where, yes, a typical Assassin's Creed game ends with the protagonist reclaiming a piece of Eden from the bad guy. One of Evie's main character traits is her commitment to the Brotherhood of old. She's a bit of a fangirl. She follows the words of her late father to the letter, and tries to live up to his standards by being the perfect assassin. In other words, she likes Assassin's Creed. So much so that her outfit takes many inspirations from previous characters just to get that point across. She's a traditionalist and throughout the game has to get creative when things don't go the way a typical Assassin's Creed experience would. At least, that is in concept. This, however, is one occasion where it seems like the villain doesn't want to fight, but actually talk it out. Something Evie is probably the worst candidate to try and convince, due to her blind commitment to the Brotherhood. I think this conversation would have been better had it been with Jacob, as he shows those darker shades throughout the story and would have probably listened to Crawford more, as we'll see in this one-sided bit of dialogue.
Time is a wonderful thing, Miss Frye. It heals all wounds. We may make mistakes while dancing, but the Berserker ends, and then we begin again.
Crawford starts by saying that time heals all wounds. No matter how many mistakes you make when dancing, the song will always start again, and you'll have another chance to get it right. This is the purpose of the Shroud of Eden, to keep Starrick alive forever, so that he can correct the mistakes of the previous villains before him. The fact he hasn't met the assassins before this point might play into his attempt to stay as distant from them as possible, as we've seen occasions where this has been the Templars' downfall. Haytham falls to his son Connor after working together with him as a compromise, but this caused him to slip away from the Templar mindset. Or even Germain, who would have never been caught if he hadn't worked with Arno earlier in the story. Crawford sees the problem as the time in between the Templars' attempts. There's too much time without any of their Grandmasters learning from one another. Just acknowledging these as cycles at all showcases a self-awareness on the part of the writers, that there have been a lot of Assassin's Creed games up till this point, and they have started to follow a bit of a formula. One that repeats itself in each game without moving away from it enough to stand on its own. Crawford's wanting to outlive the conflict is a reflection of the series itself. He wants to move past the Assassin and Templar war. He wants something new. Perhaps this is also what the writers want, to move away from the same formula the games have been following and try something different, something without Assassins and Templars. No surprise then that the next game that this studio made was Assassin's Creed Odyssey, a game which started as its own separate spin-off series, Odyssey, an Assassin's Creed adventure, only later to be brought into the main series for that brand recognition. Starrick's words may just be a coincidence, but they do ring true when we look at what happened next in the series as a whole. The formula did change, and the franchise moved as far back in history as it could to avoid using the Templars and Assassins, and to do something entirely different. So I hear you ask, what does Evie say in response to such a profound statement?
And over.
People can learn.
Oh dear. She's not wrong. People can learn from their mistakes without needing to go about generations of change. We're always learning from our mistakes, and maybe to live forever would mean that these mistakes would never end. And it's not like Crawford could become a better man with more time. He's already displayed that he's rotten to the core, and that extending that wouldn't give him more power. To sneak a very good Doctor Who quote in there,
some people live more in 20 years than others do in 80.
I understand that Evie is uncomfortable with the situation and wants to get out of there as soon as possible, but we are long past the incredible monologues of AC3, as we don't get any kind of valid points brought up by Evie to fight back. He's running circles around her without any conflict from Evie. She wants to continue playing the Assassin's Creed game, while Starrick wants to start a new game. Of course, he shouldn't win, but imagine if his words had had some impact on the ending, where the twins are given the choice to wear the shroud. Which we do get in the game, but they dismiss it too quickly. The chance to end the cycle of conflict is the Templars' goal here. Why is it not the Assassins' too?
Isn't everyone around you repeating the same steps? But if one man could remember the dance, could know the time, then he could change things.
Starrick then points out that everyone is repeating the same steps over and over again, and I don't think this is coming from a writer who has been enjoying the direction the series is going in. Why draw attention to the fact that the upcoming set piece in the vault is a carbon copy of the one in the previous game, or that the same themes are being explored over and over again without a resolution? And especially the fact that this game has nothing new to contribute to that argument. It's like they purposefully made a dully written Assassin's Creed game and then at the end thought they were clever by pointing out how by the numbers it was, in the hopes that people will then want the series to change in order to be better. The material for this series had not run out until this point. I don't think anyone complained about the storytelling in Unity. It was the technical issues and bugs, and the English accents, that broke the immersion. Yes, Unity's story is a mess, and definitely a step down from the previous titles, but it was still exploring new avenues and trying something different with its presentation. Nobody was complaining that Assassin's Creed had run out of steam, especially not because of Unity. Unity, if anything, proved just how far Assassin's Creed could be pushed, even to the point where it broke. But no, apparently now Assassin's Creed as a concept is worn out and needs to move on to something new. Again, Evie just doesn't have a good argument for this.
I have had enough.
She's just trying to move away from Starrick. The lack of a counter-argument says a lot about what was going through the writers' heads. This isn't a justification for why the Assassin's Creed formula can continue. It's a stubborn denial that anything needs to change at all, and a villain presenting the idea of change, one that doesn't get any pushback, so it looks like Starrick is winning this conversation.
This dance is nearly over.
It's ominous how true these words are, with the added context of what came next in the series. Ubisoft Quebec viewed this as the end of the phase Assassin's Creed had been in from the start. Therefore, having a line like this, even if it's just a taunt, from a one-dimensional villain, is very telling. Odyssey has to have been a very real idea in the minds of the devs at this point. This dance was very much ending from their point of view, and the new direction, one that Quebec would put their all into, was on the horizon. Now, all this to say, I could be looking too deeply into this. Crawford Starrick is the villain, and of course he's going to say things that shine the assassins in a bad light. However, I would argue that the crumbs and hints are still there for how Ubisoft Quebec was feeling in regards to the series. With the two studios, I feel like we've seen a split between a studio that wants to make Assassin's Creed games and one that wants to move past them and expand the series into something new. If we move any malicious intent that Crawford would have, this monologue does make players start to think, in the final moments of Syndicate, whether the franchise has room to grow. It aims to soften the blow for when Origins, and especially for Odyssey, when they arrive, by suggesting the idea of something new. Something tells me this scene was written as a direct response to Unity. We know from what Mark Alexi said in his presentation that Unity was one of the major mistakes Assassin's Creed had made, and that it rocked the foundation of the team, and naturally that would have an impact on the next game to come out because of it. I don't doubt that Assassin's Creed Syndicate would have received a lot more pressure behind the scenes following the release of Unity, and that moments like Crawford's speech at the end were an effort to change the narrative around the game, because even if you didn't enjoy Syndicate, it left you with this final mission, feeling like things had to change going forward. For that, I think what was written here for Starrick is a vessel for Quebec to wrap up this phase of the series. It's a commentary that they want to do better than what came before. Mark Alexi stated that he felt like the new games were going to compete with the older ones, that due to the anthology nature of the series, you can start anywhere and choose which period of history you want to explore. Therefore, the newer games need to be better than the older ones. I feel like this fear of what came before being better stems from this dialogue with Starrick. The obsessive need to correct the mistakes of the past and learn the dance moves is a promise that not only the mistakes of Unity will be rectified, but that the newer games will always aim to learn from the old and be better. For a series with as many entries as Assassin's Creed, hearing that the passion to innovate is a driving force going forward is a good one to hear, no matter what you think about the form that innovation took in the form of the RPG games. I don't think any other scene in Assassin's Creed Syndicate shows the openness and vulnerability from the studio to the player quite like this one. It's a piece of history now, seeing what it hinted at, and it's scary to suggest it, but it looks like Crawford Starrick may have won after all. But now I'm going to hand it over to you. What do you think of this scene in Assassin's Creed Syndicate? Obviously, as I said earlier, I could be looking into this way too much because at a base value, it is just trying to give Crawford Starrick some motivation, and motivation that he sorely needed because he's barely in the rest of the game, and especially considering after this scene, he doesn't really say much. When he's actually in the final fight, he just kind of rambles for a bit, giving some generic evil lines of dialogue, and in his memory corridor sequence, which is supposed to be the big conflict of interests between the Assassins and Templars, where they rant about their motivations and have these philosophical questions, he just dies. He has very weak dialogue, which is really odd considering how powerful his sentences in this dance end up being. What do you think about the direction that Assassin's Creed has gone in since this? Do you think that Ubisoft Quebec's mindset was maybe justified, or do you think they've gone way too far off the spectrum? That's kind of where I'm lying. And a question that I'd like to ask you as well is, I think this is the scene that moves Assassin's Creed from Phase 1 into Phase 2. What do you think is the scene that drives Assassin's Creed from Phase 2 to Phase 3? This is most likely going to be a scene in Valhalla or Mirage. What do you think that moment was? Let me know down below, let me know what you think of this scene in particular. And if you enjoyed, please like the video and subscribe for more Assassin's Creed content, and I will see you in the next video.